Oh, great. All right. So um, we're gonna do the it's actually, I mean, we're not doing this by parshiot, but we're gonna finish up the first parsha in Deuteronomy and begin the second parsha. So we look at chapter 3, verse 18. And I commanded you at that time, saying, "Ve'etzavetchem be'etahi lemor." The Lord your God has given you this land to possess it. Pass over armed before your brothers, the children of Israel, all who are warriors. And I commanded you. He was addressing the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad. Okay. Why pass over it armed before your brothers, the children of Israel? All right. Why Reuben and Gad?
Weren't they the ones who wanted to settle east of the Jordan?
Right. Exactly. Right. So they're in the land east of the Jordan, and they raise cattle. And they believe that this land is good for raising cattle. So they go to Moses and they say, you know what? Don't give us our allocation of land on the western side of the Jordan. We'll stay here. And if you remember what Moses' reaction is at that time?
He was very angry.
Yeah, he flipped out, right? He flipped out. He said, you know, what? Is everybody else is going to go fight and you guys are going to stay here? And they said, you know, and I actually don't, I'm not sure that I buy what they say, but they say, no, you misunderstood us. Okay. What we meant was we'll go over with everybody else and we'll help you conquer the land, of course. Could we opt out of the war? Right? We'll help you conquer the land. And then after the land has been conquered, we'll come back and take our possession in Transjordan. So, okay, so that's what he agreed to. And so he says, pass over armed before your brothers. Okay, they would go in front of the other Israelites to battle because they were mighty, and the enemies would fall before them, as it is said of God, he tears the arm together with the crown. The Taraf Zeroa Af Kod Kod. Okay, so this is in the end of Deuteronomy, when Moses is foretelling the future of each of the tribe in poetic language. So you know, so they're supposed to go over. And that's what they actually agreed to, that they would take the lead, that they would be sort of the shock troops or the forefront of the battle. All right. So now we're into Parashat Ve'etchanan. Okay. Chapter 3, verse 23. Ve'etchanan el Adonai be'etahi lemor. Okay, I pleaded to God, to the Lord at that time, saying, okay, Ve'etchanan. Okay, so that's the first question that Rashi's going to ask, right? What does this Ve'etchanan really mean? Because, I mean, it's an unusual word, right? It's an unusual word. You might pick it up from the context but I don't think, I mean, I haven't actually checked this, but I don't think that this word in this particular conjugation appears elsewhere in the Torah. Okay. I mean, you can certainly tell from the context, because the next verse, he's asking God to let him go over into the promised land, right? So you can tell what it means from the context, but it's not an obviously it's not an obvious word. Okay. The et hanan ein hanun b'kol makom ela lashon matnat chinam. The word hanun, and in its various conjugations, right? Because what is this? It's a reflexive, right? It's a hit pa'el, it's reflexive, and the root is hanan, right? Het nun nun, right? So what does the root het nun nun mean, right? What meaning does that carry? And it says it is an expression signifying a free gift. Okay, now that root het nun nun, are there other places that you might be familiar with that root, Hanan? Right. Well, there's a name, Hanan, right? And there's a name, Hananya, right? Hananya means God has given, God has granted, right? Hanina means clemency or forgiveness. Okay. Hanina is also a first name. There's a lot of different, and then of course there's the name Hannah, right? Hannah, which actually is not het nun nun, it's het nun hey, but the hey becomes nun under. I'm not such an expert in grammar, but the two are connected, and Rashi is certainly drawing that connection, right? So, right, like the word chen, right? Sim shalom, tova uvracha, right? Grant peace, goodness, blessing, chen v'chesed v'rachamim, right? Grace and compassion and mercy, right? So the word chen means grace, okay? But Rashi, when he says it's matnat chinam, it's undeserved, right? It's undeserved. So Moses, by saying ve'et hanan, what's the basis of his request to God?
We're not deserving that. It's completely up to God.
Right, exactly. Right. I mean that it's not. He's not saying do this because I deserve it. Quite the opposite. He's saying do this. It's just, I am asking you for a gift, right? Matnat chinam. Chinam means without cost, right? I mean, the word chinam is it's complicated. It's complicated I mean, it can be translated into English in many different ways depending on the context, right? In modern Hebrew, chinam generally means free, right? Like buy one, get one b'chinam, right? Literally, get for free, right? But we also have the phrase sinat chinam, right? Which doesn't mean like free hatred, like, oh, you don't have to pay for this hatred, right? It means, we generally translate it as baseless hatred or groundless hatred, right? But again, it has the sense of undeserved, right? In the case of sinat chinam, it's undeserved in a negative sense, not undeserved in a positive sense, right? But it is like the Christian idea of grace, right? The Christian idea of grace, that we are saved by grace and not by works, right? I mean, this is a basic and long-standing discussion in Christian theology that I think, most Jews who are acculturated in any way have some sort of at least passing familiarity with that discussion, right? So Rashi goes on, even though the righteous may base a request on the merit of their good deeds, they request only a free gift of the omnipresent, right? So, in other words, Moses could have said to God, grant me this because I've deserved it, I've earned it, right? And he would have had a leg to stand on, right? But that's not the basis of his request. The basis of her request is simply, grant me this because you're merciful, right? I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for it because you're merciful. Why? Because God had said to him back in Exodus, right? And this is actually in this week's Parsha, right? When Moses has his meltdown after the sin of the golden calf, right? And he says, I'm quitting this job unless you let me see your face, right? And God says, you can't see my face, but special for you today, I'm going to let you see my back. Okay, and he passes before them, right? And then he chants the 13 attributes, and then he goes on, right? And I will favor when I wish to favor. Okay, v'chanoti, when I wish to favor, ahon. Moses spoke to him using the expression ve'et chanan. It's the same root. It's the same short. V'chanoti, right? Hanun. This hanun is one of 10 terms which denote prayer, right? So this actually, and don't forget, Rashi is living in France, right? He's living in France. He's acculturated, right? We know. How do we know that he's acculturated?
Well, some of what he says reflects his time, and also he uses, sometimes when he can't find the words, he uses French.
Right, he uses French, right? So that's how we know he's acculturated, right? Don't take that for granted, okay? If your grandparents or great-grandparents lived in Poland, they probably didn't know Polish.
Correct.
Right? If they lived in Lithuania, they didn't know Lithuanian, right? Because nobody knows Lithuanian. Even Lithuanians don't know Lithuanian. Right? So that the measure of acculturation is whether they speak the vernacular, and especially if they speak it as their main language. right? And I wrote a couple weeks ago about this TV show on Netflix, The Club, right, which is about Turkish Jews. And the switch, I mean, I'm certainly far from an expert on Turkish Jews, but I know probably more than the average American Ashkenazi Jew about Turkish Jews, right? And they switched from Ladino to Turkish. Okay, that Jews lived in Turkey from 1492 to 1950 without ever bothering to learn Turkish, right? It was only 1950, maybe 1940s, that they started to learn Turkish, all right? And today, Turkish is their primary language, right? And the knowledge of Ladino is dying out, okay? But I had a professor in rabbinical school who was from Turkey, and Ladino was his mother tongue. And he said, as a general rule, I know this is a tangent, but that's all right. Whether Jews primarily spoke a Jewish language or the vernacular was dependent on whether they perceived the local culture as of equal weight, of equal merit to Jewish culture, right? In other words, you understand what I'm saying, right? If they looked down on the peasants, if they looked down on the local people, they didn't bother to learn their language. If they felt that the local people were equally cultured, then they did learn the language. And if you think about it, if you look at the history of European Jewry, it makes sense, right? Where did Jews primarily speak the vernacular? Germany.
Western Europe, yeah.
Right? In Western Europe, because it was high culture, right? And I mean, no greater tragedy, than Jews who fled Germany in the 30s and came either to the United States or Palestine, and could not, first of all, were in shock, because how could Germany do this to us? Because we were such good Germans, right? But could not bear to turn themselves away from German culture, right? Whereas Eastern European Jews, good riddance, right? Good riddance. So anyway, point I'm making is Rashi spoke French, so he was acculturated. So he knows something, at least, about Catholic teaching, right? How much, I don't know, right? But I think that this particular comment of his is reminiscent of the grace versus works debate within Christianity, right? How do we achieve salvation, right? And the Orthodox normative Christian position is grace. It's a gift, right? There's nothing that we can do that earns us salvation, right? And to maintain that we've earned salvation is pure heresy, right? And then they go on. I mean, Paul really, I mean, at least as Paul's conventionally understood, really strongly anti-Judaic, right? That Judaism teaches that you can earn salvation, right? But you can't earn salvation. It's a gift from God, right? Well, here, Rashi is saying the same about Moses, right? That he's not talking about salvation. He's talking about entrance into the land, right? But right, because God has punished him, saying, "You won't enter the land," right? And that's what he's asking for at the beginning of Parshat Ve'et Hanan, and he's basically throwing himself on the mercy of the court, right? And whether that is because Moses truly believes that even he is undeserving and needs to rely purely on God's grace, or whether he's setting an example, right? If I, Moses, have to rely on God's grace, right? All the more so, all of you who are not me, right? So he's asking God for grace. Okay. Be'et hahi, at that time, after I conquered the land of Sihon and Og, right? I thought that perhaps the vow which God had made that I should not enter the land was nullified, since the land I entered was part of the land of Canaan. Right now, right, so we know, right, because he's talking about, last 2 weeks ago, we were talking about the battle against Sihon and Og, right, which we won. So Moses, according to Rashi, says, well, God said you're not going to enter the promised land, right? But we just conquered Sihon and Og, which, although in Transjordan, right, on the east bank, is still part of the promised land. How do we know it's part of the promised land? Because that's where Reuben and Gad are going to settle, right? So maybe God changed his mind. Okay, so now I'm going to ask him. Now, part of this, I have to say, just re-looking at this right now, part of it to me doesn't make complete sense, right? Because if Moses is reasoning that the decree has been canceled, he doesn't need to ask God to cancel it, right? But, he could also be thinking, well, promised land, yes, but not crossing the Jordan, right? But, give him an inch and he'll take a mile, right? So God has already given me like a smidgen of a reprieve. Maybe now it's time to ask for the whole thing, right? He's given me half a loaf, I'll ask for the whole thing. So it's not, it strikes me as a bit illogical, but not completely illogical, right? Say, this is one of 3 occasions in which Moses said before the omnipresent, I will not let you go until you let me know whether or not you will grant my request. Okay, now this actually is depending on something in the later verses, right? Because God, in a couple of verses, says to Moses, leave me alone, right? And God wouldn't have to say, leave me alone, unless Moses wasn't already doing it, right? So that's the point he's making here. Okay. Okay. Adonai Elohim, so we're verse 24. Atah hachilota laharot et avdacha et godlecha ve'et yadcha hachazakah. O Lord God, you have begun to show your servant your greatness and your strong hand. Asher mi el b'shamayim uva'aretz, For who is a God in heaven or in earth? Asher ya'asecha ma'asecha uvechir gvuratecha, who can do as your deeds and your might. Okay. Lord God, Adonai Elohim, right? So what's noticeable about this?
Two names of God.
Two names of God, right? I mean, up until now, we've seen just Adonai,
Right.
right? Adonai. And here it's Adonai Elohim, although it's really not Adonai Elohim. Again, I just noticed you have to, I mean, you have to read this over and over and over and over, right? Because I spent a couple of hours preparing this afternoon, and I just now noticed another sort of inconsistency in the text. It doesn't really say Adonai Elohim. Right now, there are, right, in other words, it doesn't say Yud He Vav He, and then the word Elohim. It doesn't say that, right? There are places in the Torah where it does say that. It does say Adonai Elohim, right? And according to the documentary hypothesis, right, these are places where the two sources, right, the J source and the E source, are being edited together, right? But here it doesn't say that. Where it says Adonai, it's written out, it's Aleph Daled Nun Yud, right? And it's only we pronounce it as Adonai Elohim instead of Adonai Adonai, right? And but that's not actually what it says, right? And I think Rashi, which I'm not faulting him for, right? When Rashi reads the text, he reads it through rabbinic spectacles, right? And anybody who, you know, if you're preparing the Torah reading, right, and you come across Aleph Daled Nun Yud, and then Yud He Vav He, how do you read it? You read it as Adonai Elohim, not Adonai Adonai, right? So when Rashi sees that, he sees it as Adonai Elohim. And because Rashi sees it that way, I saw it that way until about 2 minutes ago, okay, right? But the point of his comment, okay, you who are merciful in judgment, Rahum Badin. Now, what is he talking about here? All right, right. So biblically, there are two main names of God, Adonai and Elohim, right? Or Torahitically, right? But rabbinically, they represent two different aspects of God, right? Adonai is God in the aspect of mercy, and Elohim is God in the aspect of judgment or justice, right? Now, why are they two different elements? Because the fact of the matter is that justice and mercy are sometimes in tension with each other, right? I mean, if we treated everybody precisely as they deserved, might not be so pleasant all the time, right? Might not, right? No, but I'm serious, right? I mean, this whole, how many times do you see, like there was, and I forget, it was probably Ask Amy. It sounds to me like it was probably Ask Amy, okay, who was a classmate of mine at Georgetown, Amy Dickinson. But the question was, an acquaintance of mine died from COVID and they were unvaccinated, okay? And I feel like a hypocrite in sending their family a condolence card, because it seems to condone their decision to not be vaccinated, right? And Amy said, no, it doesn't. Don't, send a condolence card. You're sorry for the pain that their family is going through. And it doesn't mean that you agreed with this person's decision not to get vaccinated, right? But look, I'll tell you the truth. Okay, when I see not some random Joe Schmo who has been brainwashed, by the Joe Rogans and the Fox Newses. Now, I don't know if Joe Rogan is vaccinated, but all the people on Fox who are telling people not to get vaccinated, they're all vaccinated, right? I feel bad for them, right? But when some prominent right-wing media figure who isn't vaccinated dies of COVID, it's part of me that gloats, right? It's a part of me that gloats. And then, because that's justice, right? And then the mercy part kicks in and says, it's not the kind of person you want to be. Right? Not the kind of person you want, right? And you all know what I'm talking about, because right?
Yes.
And if we went around treating people as they deserve by strict justice, right? The world would be an unpleasant place, right? But the fact of the matter is that if God treated us the way we deserve, according to strict justice, right, our lives would be unpleasant too, right? Or to quote, Hobbes' Leviathan, right? Our lives would be nasty, brutish, and short. Right? So that's where the Adonai Elohim comes in, right? Where we're asking God to temper justice with mercy, right? So then, atah hachilota laharot abda, you have begun to show your servant, begun. And that's what it says. That's not like an interpretation. That's the plain meaning. An opening for standing and offering prayer, even though the decree has been fixed. Moses says to him, I learned this from you. You said to me, and now leave me alone. Okay, so getting back to the previous verse. Was I holding you? However, you said this to open the door, that it depended on me, whether to pray for them or to leave you alone. So do I think to act now. Okay, so he's talking about, again, in this week's Parsha, right? After the sin of the golden calf, And it is, if you look at it, God tells Moses, leave me alone, right? And he hasn't even spoken out yet, right? To say, please forgive this people, right? It's only after God tells him, leave me alone, right? And it's the same way, I think of something like, a little kid has done something wrong, right? And their parent says, isn't there something you want to tell me? Or isn't there something you want to ask of me, right? And it opened the door to ask for mercy, right? And what Moses is doing, and it usually works the other way, right? Where we take something that's vis-a-vis an individual and we generalize it to the klal, the whole people. Here's the opposite, right? In other words, God hinted to Moses in this week's Parsha, yeah, you know what? Yes, I've said that I'm going to destroy the people, but maybe you should ask for mercy, hint, 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 right? And he does, and God says, okay, right? And so he's thinking, if you did that for the people as a whole back then, maybe you'll do it for me now. Okay, so you've kind of opened the door. Okay, your greatness, the attribute of your goodness. Okay, your hand, this is your right hand, which is extended to all who come into the world to accept the repentance, right? Pshuta l'chol ba'ei olam. And this appears, I don't know exactly where, but this phrase is familiar from the High Holiday liturgy. Actually, it is in the expansion of the 10 attributes, which is from this week's Parsha, right? Right? It says Pshuta l'chol ba'ei olam. That says that in the Matzor, right? That when he talks about God's hand, right, it means God's right hand, which is extended to all, right, to beckon them in repentance, right? And clearly that's a metaphor, right? I mean, Rashi certainly doesn't believe that God literally has a right hand, right? Whether Moses believed that God literally has a right hand, I'll take a pass on that one, right? Because I honestly don't know, right? I honestly don't know. I mean, there's a lot of anthropomorphisms in the Torah, right? A lot, right? And later the sages say, oh, these are all metaphors, right? It doesn't mean that they were intended as metaphors contemporaneously, right? So I will take a pass on the question of whether Moses thought that God actually has a right hand. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, if you read, again, this is all in this week's Parsha, right? That God, I mean, Moses says to God, right? Right, and he says this, I mean, quite literally, it's a wonderful phrase, right? Im eincha soleach, if you will not forgive them, macheni na misifrecha asher katavta, right? Erase me from your book which you have written. Okay, if you're not going to forgive them, I do not agree to be in your Torah, All right. I maintain control over what they're calling in college athletics NLI, name, likeness, and image, right? The NCAA now allows college athletes to make money off their name, license, and image, which they couldn't do until this year, right? So Moses says to God, look, you can write the Torah, but my NLI belongs to me. Okay. And I do not agree to be in your Torah unless you forgive this people. Right. And God says, it's got me over a barrel. Right. What can I do? I mean, it's the 5 books of Moses. Right. If Moses is not right, then I'm left only with Genesis. Right. And what good is that? So I guess I've got to forgive this people, right? Right. So forgive me, forgive this people, or I'm not going to be in your Torah anymore. Strong hand. This hand is called strong because by your mercy, you forcibly subdue the attribute of strict judgment, right? Which I find this fascinating, okay? Because it reminds me of this passage. Again, I mean, you see stuff year after year, over and over, and at a certain point, something that you've never seen before jumps out at you. Okay, and this happened about 3 or 4 years ago on the high holidays during, like in the Mahsor. There's this passage, and you'll find it familiar, right? Where the Mahsor says, we're saying to God, right, just as Abraham conquered his feelings of mercy for his son and prepared to offer him as a sacrifice, so may your mercy conquer your judgment and forgive us, right? And you read through it, and in the context of the Mahsor, it makes perfect sense. But it doesn't make sense. It's flipped on its head, right? Because we're saying to God, God, do what Abraham did. But actually, we don't want God to do what Abraham did. Right? We want God to do the opposite of what Abraham did. Right? You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Right? Because it's natural for a parent to say, look, I have compassion on my son. God says kill him, but I'm not going to do it because I have compassion. Right? But we're saying to, right? But he had to conquer his compassion. He had to grab his compassion and fling it to the ground and sit on it so that he could act without compassion. Right? And we're saying, just like Abraham, so you. But it's the opposite. We're saying, no, fling justice to the ground and sit on it so that you can act with compassion. Right? Now, it makes sense in a way because the overarching theme of the Yamim Noraim is that we have no merit on our own, but we come from a good family, right? We have yichus, right? We have yichus. So don't So, which is interesting, we're not asking God to act out of a sense of grace. We're asking God to act out of a sense of merit, but not our merit, ancestral merit, right? We have the merit of our ancestors, which should accrue to us, right? So here is the same thing, right? Let your mercy subdue your judgment, right? That's right out of the Machzor. That's right out of the Machzor. That's your strong right hand. For who is like God? Who can do as you cannot be compared to a king of flesh and blood, who has advisors and associates who restrain him when he wishes to act with kindness and to forego his regulations. You, however, have no one to prevent you from forgiving me and annulling your decree. Right? The simple meaning of the verse is, you have begun to show your servant the battle of Sihon and Og, as it is written, behold, I have begun to deliver Sihon and his land before you. Show me also the war of the 31 kings of Canaan. Right? So here, right? So this king of flesh and blood parables are very common, very common. Right? And whenever we're talking about the king of flesh, now here it's explicit, it's not even a parable, right? But we have all these, generally in Midrashim, right? Lama hadavar dome, what does this resemble? Lamelech basar v'dam, a king of flesh and blood, right? King of flesh and blood is a parable to God, right? But a king of flesh and blood wants to act with forgiveness, and his advisors say, oh no, you can't do that, right? You can't forgive them. Rules are rules. Off with their heads, right? Rules are rules, off with their heads, right? I mean, it kind of reminds me actually of the Haftorah a few weeks ago, which is David's deathbed speech, right? Where he's telling, Shlomo, all these people that I promised that I would not put to death, right? And he says, I promised that I would not put them to death. But you are a smart man, you know what to do, right? And here, right, so that's what Rashi's saying, right? That a king might want to forgive, right? But his advisors tell him not to, right? But you have no one to prevent you from forgiving me and annulling your decree, right? I mean, now, there are other places actually where God does have advisors, right? And they argue with, right? Who? The angels, right? The angels, right? But of course, God doesn't have to listen to the angels. But then again, a king doesn't have to listen to his advisors either, right? But I mean, the classic actually example of this justice versus mercy, where there is, commentary, and I think it's in Rashi, but it's at the beginning of Genesis, right? Where God says, right? Let us make man, na'aseh Adam, right? And, like on the pshat level, when God says, let us make man, it's the royal we, right? Because after all, it's Elohim, which is also in the plural, right? But the commentary, and I'm pretty sure it's Rashi, says, when he says, let us make man, who's he talking to? Right? Who's he talking to? Lemin imlach. Who is he consulting? He's consulting the angels, right? And what do the angels say? Right? The angels say, God, don't do it. Right? Don't do this. Don't create man. Right? Why don't the angels think that God should create man?
Because man could somehow, I think they were afraid that man will supersede angels.
Not in this particular, there are other places where that's so, right? That's for example, that's why the Kaddish is in Aramaic, right? I don't know if you know this, right? But why is the Kaddish is in Aramaic? Because the Kaddish is the prayer of the angels, okay? But the angels don't understand Aramaic. So the Kaddish is in Aramaic so that the angels don't get mad that we're saying their prayer, right? I guess they don't understand English either, because otherwise I just let the cat out of the bag. But that's not the real reason, okay? But that's one of the sort of midrashic explanations as to why the Kaddish is in Aramaic, right? So there is certainly places where the angels are concerned that they might be displaced by man, but that's not what's going on here. What's going on here, and that's why it's a case of mercy overcoming justice, is that the angels are saying, look, you know that people are bad, right? People are bad, right? People are bad, right? Yetzer lev ha'adam ra mino orav, right? The inclination of a man's heart is evil from his youth, right? Why do you want to go and create these sinful, nasty, horrible creatures when you've got us around? We're perfect, we're sinless, we're beautiful. You don't need them. Don't create them. They're bad. Okay? And God flings justice to the earth and lets mercy take over, and out of mercy creates human beings, right? And then Rashi reads Na'aseh Adam a second time as a nifal. Na'aseh Adam, too late, man is already made. Okay, in other words, it's a past tense. It's a nifal. I don't know how you say that in English, but it's man has already been made. Okay, so this conflict between justice and mercy, right? And the angels being on the side of justice and God being on the side of mercy, is shot through. And it's just, it just happens that we're reading this the same week that we're reading Ki Tisa, but most of the beginning of the Et Hanan ala Rashi is in dialogue with the whole business of the golden calf. Okay, so it's kind of fortuitous. All right. since I often go over, I'm going to take the privilege of wrapping up 2 minutes early tonight instead. Okay, so Lila Tov and Shabbat Shalom.
This is
Thank
very
you.
interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
All right, very good.
Shabbat
See ya.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Yeah, Shabbat
Shalom.
Shalom.